If you could look over my shoulder and watch while I was coding with test-driven development, I think it would look qualitatively different from if I were developing the same software without it. And then if I were using approval tests, it would look different again, but I still think it would look more like TDD than not. So what is it that actually characterizes test-driven development? What defines it? In this video, I'm asking that question. If somebody was doing TDD, how would you tell? And I'm going to give you a demo of me doing that code kata, so you can look over my shoulder and see what it looks like when I'm using approval tests. Hi, I'm Emily Bache. I'm a software developer and creator of Saman Coaching. On my channel, you can find content for software developers and technical coaches. If you like this content, please hit subscribe and like. When I first started talking about approval testing, I got a lot of pushback from experienced developers who use test-driven development. They noticed that because an approval test isn't finalized and passing until the code it's testing is also finalized and working, you can't write the test first. And Bob Martin's 3 laws explicitly say you have to write the test first. So it's not TDD. Well, maybe if you use that definition, but I actually still claim you can do TDD with approval tests. Bob Martin's first law of TDD says you are not allowed to write any production code unless it is to make a failing unit test pass. An approval test doesn't really work like that. The tests don't kind of fail like that to drive you. I think easier than me trying to explain this is if I show you an example. In my guided learning hour video, TDD, what it is and why you should care, I did a demo of the Leap Year's Kata using totally normal unit tests. In this video, I'm going to show you the same kata again, but this time with approval testing. To be honest, it's not really a problem that lends itself to approval testing because it's just so small. It's just one function. But I think it's useful to see this direct comparison with ordinary TDD. So as you're watching this demo, I want you to consider this question. If somebody were doing TDD, how would you tell? The idea with leap years is that you've got to write a function that's going to return true or false depending on whether the input integer is a leap year or not. And the problem description goes on to explain the business rules for that and some examples. So I'm just kind of imagining that I would have had a conversation with somebody who understood these requirements or understood what the system needed to do. And I've made this little sketch on a whiteboard or something when we were talking. That we've got these 4 examples that absolutely have to work, that illustrate all of the various cases that we're interested in. And then a little note about which business rule it is that applies in that case. So I come up with, this is my understanding of the problem. And if my testing produces this kind of output, then my stakeholders will be happy. So that's typical for an approval testing approach, that you begin with some kind of sketch. The next thing I wanted to show you was, of course, I've got a starting test here. This is a framework called Verify. It's for C#, and I'm using it with NUnit here. So I've just set up an empty test case that just says hello world, so I can show you how it works. When I verify the string hello world, the test fails because it doesn't have a previously verified output to compare against. And it helpfully brings up this diff saying I received hello world, but in my verified file, I have nothing. So they didn't match and the test failed. So at this point, I could choose to accept that and approve it. But at this point, I'm just making sure my testing framework's set up. So I'm just going to ignore that. And I'll just delete these 2 files that it came up with for that test. Okay, so I'd better write a better test than that for my leap year problem. So I'm going to start by renaming the test case. This is a test for leap years, and I'm going to put my sketch easily to hand. I mean, sometimes if you've got this on a whiteboard or something, then of course it's on the wall. But for the purposes of this demo, it's in a file here in the project. And I think it's important to rename things to start with in approval testing, because the names of the test case get included in the file names for the approved or verified files. So I'm going to choose a name for this test, and the examples I've got here are all quite recent years. So I'm going to put that as my name of my test, recent years. I could have split this up into 4 different test cases with 4 different names, but today I feel like having them all in one test case. I think it'll give me a better overview of this problem. And it's my sketch shows them all together, and I think that helps. So I'm going to run this again now, and the same thing happens. It fails and it brings up a diff tool. The only difference here is that the names of the files are different. One's called received and one's called verified with the name of this test. So I need something better than hello world here. So how about I start coming up with something that looks a bit like my sketch? How about if I just have 2001 is false? That's not a leap year. So this fails, and now you can see that text instead of hello world. But this time I think I might approve that because it actually looks a little bit closer to my sketch, and it's kind of a step on the road. So I'll approve that to get to a green tests. I'm not done yet. It's all right. I'm not going to check this in yet, but it's something along the way. So I think I need 4 years in this list for it to actually look anything like my sketch, really. So let's make a list of all these 4 years, and then I can print them instead. So I've got 1996, 1900 and 2000 in my sketch. And then I'm going to want to not just print them out, but also the result of when, whether they're a leap year or not. So let's just have a little mapping over that list to produce a new list of strings that are going to produce something that looks a bit like 2001 is false, but for all 4 years. Okay, so that passes, of course, because I forgot to actually verify the result. Okay, so now I should get a failing test. Excellent. So that looks kind of hopeful. Instead of just 2001, I've now got all 4 years. So this is perhaps a little bit closer to my sketch. So I'm going to approve that. And I'm not done yet, but I'm making progress in small steps. Okay, so what needs to change now to make this closer to my sketch? Well, in the sketch, I've got all these little notes about what's interesting about this particular year. And I'm thinking I might want to include that in my output. So I'm going to have to include that in my input because it's not something that's calculated by my code. So how about I make a little, convert my list instead of being just the year, maybe it could be a tuple. So each year comes with a little note with some kind of description. It's unfortunate that it's got that great big dialogue over the top of where I'm typing. Okay, but that's kind of where I'm going with this. I'm going to have a list of tuples, the year and the note about why that one's interesting. So 2001 is a typical case, and so is 1996. 1900 was a bit of a strange case because it's divisible by 4, but it's also divisible by 100, which makes it not a leap year. Except 2000 is a strange leap year because it is divisible by 4. And these are the rules. So I didn't make the rules, but it's good to have notes, I think, that will tell me that. And now I've got those in my data, and it's not just a year anymore. I need to rename that. E for element. How about that? So the element year, and that shouldn't change anything. No, test still passing. See, now you see why I've been approving things, because even if I approve a test that's still not complete, while it's green, I can refactor. And that was a refactoring, actually. But now I can, of course, add my note here. So let's, add that at the end of the line. So now I do expect this to fail because I've added something to my output. And yeah, that's looking a little bit closer to what I wanted. I'm going to approve that. Okay, so I'm back at green. That false there. Now that is the problem. Some of these should have true instead of false. So I need to actually calculate something here, whether this thing is a leap year or not. So here's where I'm going to actually put a call to my production code. My production code does not exist yet. So I'm just going to do some design here and decide that I'm going to have a class called leap year with a static method isLeap that I can pass this integer to. Okay, so of course this doesn't compile, but my tool can help me with that. it's going to create the type for me, and then it can also create that method on the type and prompt me to give it a good return type and a good name for the argument. And let's just have this return false. So in theory, this is a refactoring actually, because it was just hard coded to be false before. And now I'm just having a new class, a new method also return false. So that should be a refactoring. But of course, it didn't quite work as I expected. False is being printed with a capital letter. That isn't quite what I've got in my sketch, but I think it's acceptable. I can work with that. So I'm back at green, which means I can refactor now. And of course, it's created this class in my test code. So I'm going to want to move that to its own file. Don't generally keep my production code in the same file as the test. So that refactoring was successful, test still passing. And that's what my verified file looks like now. So yeah, so I still need some trues in this list. For example, 1996, that should be true. Okay, so let's see if we can fix that. Oh, it hasn't put my production code in the right project, so let's just move that. Okay, and run the test to check I didn't break anything. Yep. Okay, so here I need some logic. How about if I just check if it divides by 4? That should tell me if it's a typical leap year or not. Ah, great, I got some trues now. And 2001 is still not a leap year, and 1996 is, which is the one I was trying to fix. So yeah, so it looks better, looks closer to my sketch. That output is closer, so I'm going to approve it. At this point I could refactor, but actually I think maybe I'll just move on to the next thing. That's the next biggest problem, of course, is 1900. That was not a leap year. So let's just put some production code in there to detect that case. Okay, so now I'm expecting my test to fail again, and I should be able to update that. Yeah, that looks closer to my sketch now. I've got the right result now for 1900 as well. So it's just the last one now that's not the same as what I was hoping for in my sketch. And I'll just add some more logic for that. So return true for divisible by 400. Right, so that actually has fixed that last case. Good, so I'm just looking at my sketch again. Yeah, so that's what I wanted, false, true, false, true. I think we've got there. And my tests are passing. My verified file looks like my sketch. At this point, I don't need the sketch anymore, I can delete it. And I probably want to make a commit. Just review what I've got here. Yeah. Cool, so I hope you enjoyed the demo. But about this question, if somebody was doing TDD, how would you tell? Now, I would argue that the big difference is not particularly the code or the tests that you end up with, because most of the time when you're working with other developers, all you see of their work is what they check into version control, the code you review in their merge request. And someone doing TDD might check in more test cases, or they might have extra good test coverage, hopefully less bugs. But I don't think any of those things are unique to people doing TDD. The big difference when you're doing this is the way you use tests while you develop to get feedback on the design and the current capabilities of the code you're writing, frequently. You're working in small steps, constantly checking your assumptions by running code. And I don't think it matters much if the test is nominally red or green. The point is that you're getting feedback. Frequently, you're evaluating if it matches your expectations and using that to influence the code that you write next. So what do you think? Is this TDD? Or is this something else? Write me a comment.